Hi, you got Dungeons and My Dragons. You got Dragons in My Dungeons. Andrew, and this is Gayties Toys. Today's MIA 80s Ladies is two characters from a very, very popular franchise slash brand, albeit a subset of that rolled out in a very truly baffling and, in retrospect, confusing manner. So let's just get right into Sheila and Diana from Dungeons and Dragons, the cartoon. If somehow you don't know what Dungeons and Dragons is, it is a tabletop role-playing board game that first appeared in 1974 and has really become the queen bee of all, RPG style games. Definitely made a real big splash in the 70s, and again, rolling into the 80s, it was just synonymous with role-playing games, but also, really grew its brand and public attention based off of A, its popularity, and B, the satanic panic that, accompanied it. There are many more videos on YouTube about the satanic panic. I don't have any recommendations, but go look for that. It's wild. The, at least original owner of Dungeons and Dragons was TSR, and going into the 80s, they sort of, looked around and said, everyone's doing toys, they're doing cartoons, they're doing a real multimedia push. And so they decided to follow suit because that's where the money was. As their brand grew, they decided to go in two different and very disparate avenues, toys and cartoons. For whatever reason, the twain did not meet between the two. And during the 80s, this was baffling. I mean, any brand worth its salt knew to roll out the toys and at least a cartoon, or at least a comic book, or, at least bed sheets. You sort of did this big rollout all at once, even in the 1980s. In 1983, LJN won the license for Dungeons and Dragons, and they produced a number of waves of action figures, of miniatures, of beasts, of one of the best playsets of the 80s. That's a different topic for a different day, and it is one we're going to come back to. Likewise, in 1983, a Toei animation, cartoon came to American shores and was also based on Dungeons and Dragons, but not the toy line. It was a completely different set of characters. Some characters from the toy line would appear in the cartoon, but it was really centered around a number of kids between the ages of, say, 9 to 14, who essentially just got on this cursed roller coaster ride and got thrown into the Dungeons and Dragons realm. The cartoon ran for 3 seasons, although there were only 27 episodes, which is really almost like a Netflix-style kind of rollout. I mean, typically a lot of cartoons of the time were syndicated, where they had dozens and dozens of episodes, versus this one was very, sort of episodic. So, interesting take. Gorgeous animation. I mean, they spent the time, they spent the money, they did a great job. It really did involve the kids trying to find a way home, but also getting help from the game master while also trying to thwart Venger, who was hunting them the entire time. There was an unfinished finale to the series called Requiem that it got canceled as the show got canceled. I mean, it would have sort of put a cherry on the story. It would have sort of led the kids to a choice to either return to home or vanquish Venger. And it was a cliffhanger, so I can sort of see why they wouldn't end the entire series in that manner, but also, it was a finale, a proper finale of sorts too, so kind of shitty either way. That brings us to the two characters in question today, Sheila and Diana. Of the two characters, I'm really more of a Diana stan. She was really more the kind of assertive gymnast, natural leader, very confident character. I mean, she was much more the woman of action. Very big fan of her. And I mean, the elephant in the room, there were not many black women or black girls in, sort of the boys-oriented action cartoons. I mean, the only other one I could think of on the top of my head would be Shayna from Gem. So poor Diana had, all of the black girls, all of the black women, all of their, wanting to see themselves in a character all thrust upon her shoulder, and she did it with class and grace. Sheila, on the other side, was sort of, a different kind of emotional spectrum. She was much more kind of like a little gullible, a little naive, a lot more nurturing. So a little more of the stereotypical girl character, but nevertheless, her relations to others was more interesting. She was the older sister to Bobby, and that's really where a lot of her overprotectiveness came from, was protecting him on this wild journey. Likewise, while not really stated in the show, she and Hank were boning. Like, no question about it. She needed crackers for that soup when it came to Hank. To give both of these characters sort of the D&D sheen, both of them were, kind of classifications that you would typically find in a classic D&D game. Diana was known as the acrobat. She was really more of the monk class, and she had this sort of fancy green javelin that, couldn't break and could extend and was, kind of vaguely magic. Sheila, on the other hand, was much more known as sort of like a rogue or a thief, even though she herself, wasn't really. She had a cloak of invisibility that when you put the hood up, would make her invisible. So very much the Sue Storm of the group. While she may not be the subject of this video, it is worth noting that there was another character named Karina who, as it would turn out in the finale, would prove to be not only the sister Avenger, but the daughter of the Dungeon Master. She was sort of a character who, really more on the villainous side, had a very, Avenger look at one point in the series. Likewise, she would have made a great figure. Despite a, comparatively long-running toy line, very expensive cast, really interesting characters from the LJ toy line, the characters from the cartoon did not make appearance in that. The closest thing we ever got in the 80s were some PVCs that were sold pretty much strictly out of Spain and Portugal. So very odd choice where you had, at that time, the He-Mans, the G.I. Joes, the Transformers, where everyone sort of rolled out everything as once, as best they could. D&D sort of had almost like two just completely separate pillars of merchandising. All my years looking into, all of this stuff, I cannot find a single good reason for this. What I can find is a lot of fan speculation, which some of it is wild, some of it is actually quite reasonable and probably, explains things better than, any quote I can dig up would find. One thing is that, the toy line and the cartoon did launch pretty much at the same time. The cartoon, of course, probably would have taken much longer than the toy line, so maybe, the timetables didn't quite match up, so it just wasn't worth it. The much more plausible excuse is that TSR themselves exploded in popularity and growth and success. I wouldn't say overnight, but way beyond their means. So they were not Mattel, they were not Hasbro. They were suddenly a couple of dudes making some books, making some miniatures, and suddenly they're trying to expand out this giant empire. So they didn't really have time to stop and think about strategy, rollout, connecting the dots. So unfortunately, there's a lot of fans of the D&D cartoon and the toy line and sort of wish the two had been married a little more. So how have they done since? Since there was no finale episode to the cartoon, the kids are very much still in the realm and have made a number of, let's say glorified cameos within the D&D game system itself. Likewise, they made, kind of appearances in, let's say, this year, 2024's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves. They had a very, blink and you miss it cameo during, the finale of the movie. Very great to see them. A lot of, people got very excited about it and did lead to some other very interesting develops as of late. For a long time, Dungeons & Dragons seemed to be in that realm of, visionary centurions, kind of like cartoons that's, were memorable, that fans still like, but probably didn't have the numbers to push out a whole toy line. Nevertheless, Hasbro did take advantage of the fact that a movie that they were heavily involved in was coming out, and likewise, that these characters were cameoing in it. So they did, in fact, in late 2023, start to roll out 2 waves of the entire cast. That includes, the Game Master, Avenger, all the kids. The sculpts are good. They look great. I've not personally bought them because the QC ain't QCing. You take that thing out of the package, and if a wrist or an arm is going to snap right off, so be it. So buyer beware. Also this year, in 2024, Super 7 picked up the license for Dungeons & Dragons, specifically, again, this cartoon. So they started off with the first wave that it did include Sheila. They did a variant of her already that was an invisible version. Presumably, if this is successful, we will go on to get more characters, including Diana and maybe even Avenger's sister. So high hopes for this. If you're a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, you're reading good lately. And that's it today for Sheila and Diana. We do have more to talk about with Dungeons & Dragons, because there was also that amazing toy line that there's someone missing from. So stay tuned for that. I thank you for watching. Thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, all those YouTube-y things. And I will see you next time on MIA 80s Ladies.